Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Akasemi Newsome, and I'm Associate Director of the Institute of European Studies. And I would like to welcome you all to today's conversation on the presidency of the EU Council. Now, perhaps one word about these presidencies, for some of you in the audience may not be familiar with the way the EU functions. The European Council consists of the heads of state of the member states composing the EU. It defines the overall political directions and priorities of the EU. It has its own president, Charles Michel, and works together with the president of the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. The presidency of the Council rotates among the EU member states every 6 months. During the 6-month period, the presidency chairs meetings at every level in the Council, which gives individual member states a chance to set its own priorities. Priorities, however, to benefit the EU as a whole. The German presidency ended in December of 2020, and the Portuguese presidency started in January of 2021, which is why we invited the Consuls General of Germany and Portugal for a conversation. Now, this conversation will be recorded, and the event will be moderated by my colleague, Professor Jeroen de Wolf, who is director of the Institute of European Studies, and Dr. Eduardo Pinheiro, who's coordinator of the Portuguese Studies program at IES. My colleague Heike Friedman is also moderating this event behind the scenes. The way things will work is that Jeroen and Duarte will alternate questions for about 30 minutes, and then they will pass on questions sent from the audience via chat to our speakers. So please do write down your questions in the chat function on Zoom, and our moderators will pass those on. Let me now introduce our guest speakers to you. Maria-João Cardoso is Consul General of Portugal in San Francisco. She has degrees in marine biology from Sapienza University in Rome and degrees in agricultural sciences from the University of Lisbon. She has nearly 20 years of experience in diplomatic affairs and previously served in South Korea, Russia, the Palestinian Authority, the United Kingdom, Mozambique, and Azerbaijan. Hans-Ulrich Südbeck is the Consul General of Germany in San Francisco and has degrees in history, English, and African studies. He has nearly 30 years of experience in diplomatic affairs and served previously in the Netherlands, the Ukraine, Afghanistan, the German EU representation in Brussels, with a focus on the relationship with the Western Balkans, and eventually as German ambassador in Serbia. I will now pass the baton to Jeroen to start this discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Akasemi. Thank you so much. And of course, a warm welcome to Maria-João and to Uli. We're here to, as Akasemi said, to discuss the EU presidency. But before we do so, I think people in the audience would love to hear you to speak briefly about the occurrences here in the United States in the past weeks, because so much has happened. We all witnessed these highly disturbing scenes at the Capitol in DC. We're all hopeful that with the new administration, we will be starting a new era of transatlantic cooperation. So perhaps you could briefly comment on this before we start our discussion on the presidency. And perhaps Uli could start, all the more since many people, including former Governor Schwarzenegger, have drawn parallels to Germany to the 1930s when seeing those scenes in DC. And even more, Germany itself experienced very recently, albeit in a less dramatic way, a storm on its parliament by a mob of extreme right-wing populists. So perhaps let me ask Uli and then Maria-João to very briefly comment on what we have seen here in the United States in the past weeks. Uli.
Yeah, Jeroen, thank you very much. And thank you very much to you and your fabulous team for organizing this. And a very warm welcome to my friend Maria-João and the Portuguese friends. I must, maybe I want to say that in the beginning, I might sort of switch off my photo because, or my camera, because the internet connection in Pacific Heights, San Francisco is sometimes very bad. So if I don't understand you, I'll switch off my photos. So thank you very much. And I really am looking forward to this discussion. And for the 6th of January and what happened in the US, of course, it all surprised us, and it surprised me, especially, of course, the fact that the capital was, such an easy target for many people, and I didn't expect that. But as you said, some people discussing it drew parallels also to Germany after the First World War, and which, the developments which led to the rise of Hitler in the late Weimar Republic. I'm a historian, so I could speak for an hour. I try not to. But of course, in general, the US doesn't really need very good advice on democracy from Germany. However, when I look at the situation at the moment, my one fear is that there is the great danger of the long life of this legend of the stolen election. In Germany, between the two wars, we had a similar legend, the so-called Dolchstoßlegende, which basically said the German army had never been defeated in the First World War, and the fact that Germany capitulated was only due to a number of stupid democratic politicians and wouldn't have been necessary. And that helped very much Hitler to rise to power. So when I look at this, of course, you can never compare historical situations, but you can maybe draw a few lessons. And if there were lessons, I would mention what is important is really the element of, for me, in my personal view, is the element of accountability. So the idea that really the people accountable must be held accountable, responsible people, and not only the guys and girls who actually ran into the capital, but also the ones who made it possible sort of through the debate in public, in social media, but also in the public, including public political rallies, etc., etc. Then the element of persistence. So if you once criticize someone for something, don't forget it. If I may draw a historical comparison, Hitler was put into jail in 1923 because he had tried a coup. Thank God it did. Well, it didn't work at the time. He was put into jail, but 6 months later he was released, and later on it were conservative politicians who made it possible for Hitler to rise to power. So basically, those who are committing crimes, I mean, that shouldn't be forgotten. And finally, the other element which I think is very important is also a certain degree of naming and shaming. In my view, the 6th of January is not the result of 1 or 2 days something happening, or even the phase after the November 3rd election, but it's the result of 4 years of decent politicians not speaking up against certain developments in the country. So it's also an element of enabling by silence by sort of decent people. And therefore, I think it's also important to look at the people who made that possible. All of that, of course, is my personal point of view. Thank you.
Sure. Lack of courage, right? Let me also give Maria-João an opportunity to briefly comment on the scenes we have seen here in this country in the past weeks.
Well, I'm an optimist by nature, so I usually try to focus on the future and on the optimism for the future. So, well, no matter what happened, democracy prevailed. And this is also a lesson not for the world, but also for everybody who criticized and who was there. Democracy prevailed. You have a new president now whose messages is very inclusive, who stresses the fact that he's the president of all Americans, and he will try to bring the country back together. It's very difficult because once you have for some time, even for a short time, I've seen this in other places as well, in other countries, I won't mention them, but once you have some hate speech or negative rhetoric, it's very difficult, even if it it happens just during a few years or a few months, it's very difficult then to bring people together. So this immediate reaction of the President Joe Biden and the message that he's trying to convey will help the society mend and come together again. It will take some time because, as Uli mentioned, some people still don't believe that this was the right election result, and some people still believe that they were wronged and their voice was not heard. But I think that you will make it brilliantly as always, and we have very much trust in your democracy. So that's my views. I don't want to go in more detail. I think who's the historian managed to make very intelligent and interesting parallels.
Yeah, but thank you for your message of hope. Let's now switch the topic, right? And because we're here to have a conversation on the EU presidency. And of course, the theme that will inevitably dominate, I think, the discussion is the corona pandemic, the ambitious 750 billion euros EU recovery plan. Not by accident, I would say. The priorities of Germany's presidency were driven by the motto, "Together for Europe's recovery." So the logical question then would be perhaps for Uli first and then for Maria-João. What has been achieved during the German presidency and what remains as chief priority during the Portuguese presidency? Uli, please.
Thank you. The priorities for the Portuguese, of course, I leave to Maria-João. It makes my job easier. So what has been achieved? I must say, when we were preparing for the presidency, I was very impressed at all the various challenges that we would be facing. I think it's important to remember that we're at the beginning of one of these 7-year phases in the EU policy-making process. So we had a new commission president and a new commission, but I mean, the basis of the work in the EU is the finances, and it's the 7 years multi-annual financial framework. So it's basically the budget for 7 years. So that lays the foundation for the work 2021 to 2027. And that again, that already was a huge challenge. Presidency was the fact that we agreed on a multi-annual financial framework for the next 7 years, and that we connected that with what is called the Next Generation EU big program for basically a green recovery financement, and also the way it's financed, which is for the first time basically a way to procure money on the financial markets as the EU together. That as such is was a huge nut to crack, I think, including in German domestic policies, because we were very, as you know, Germany was very reluctant to be more inventive in financing EU ambitions, but we agreed to it and there was a solution found. So that is very good. Also, I was very happy that for the first time there's a conditionality mechanism. So basically, which links the disbursements of EU funds to rule of law principles. That's the famous question of how to deal with illiberal democracies inside the European Union. And I think there's of course not the answer, but there's a beginning to the answer has been found. Then there are very far-reaching agreements on climate and digitization policies. So on climate issues, the emission reduction aim of 55% until 2030, the climate neutrality continent until 2050. All these are very ambitious goals which have to be implemented, but agreement was found on that, and that wasn't easy. In digitization, I also think there are major initiatives on the way, and we might speak about them later. But of course, also, we must mention Brexit. Brexit is another challenge. I mean, you mentioned the pandemic as an extra challenge to coming in that period where Germany had the presidency. There was the other extra challenge, that is the Brexit deal, and the hopes had been that would have been found in August, September, October, November, December, and finally they found it on the 24th of December as a Christmas present. And I think in general, it's the fact is good. There is a good basis for a new partnership between the EU and the UK. I think the agreement contains a lot of good things, but there are also certain things which have not been agreed. And maybe also we come back to the Brexit topic later in the discussion. But I think given the vast amount of challenges, I think the total balance is quite okay. And I'm very happy that my colleagues in Berlin and Brussels, managed to find a number of solutions. Of course, all of that said, it's only, the council and also the presidency of the council is only one actor in dealing with all these games. There are other major actors and they all contributed, and of course the member states.
Yeah, quite some important progress. I can agree with you definitely on that. But of course, there's many challenges still that we're facing, and hence I turn to Maria-João to tell us a little bit about the priorities of the Portuguese presidency, Maria-João.
Well, we were very lucky that the multi-annual financial framework got approved in time. So now we'll have the task of implementing it and also the recovery program. But it's easier because we've come to an agreement. So that part, the most difficult part, is done. Our priorities, also following on what Uli mentioned, let's say the motto of our presidency is time to deliver a fair, green and digital transition. So the green and digital transition, it's something that we have been moving towards for the past 5 years maybe, and or very intensively, I mean. And so, but we know, and we're very much aware of this part of the transition. We know that there are strong social and economic impacts of these green and digital transitions for people, for common people, for people who work in industries which are not green and are not digital. So the social dimension of the EU is fundamental to strengthen our citizens' confidence in a just transition and in the EU, because that's a way of avoiding populist movements. We've seen that in Europe as well. Populism is coming back, and it's perhaps because we don't manage to explain exactly what we're trying to do. And so one of our concerns is not to leave people behind. So it's that we must strengthen our European social model as we do the green and digital transitions, which are very trendy, they sound very nice, very modern, but we cannot leave the other people behind. It's about a whole generation that won't be able to follow this transition. So they have, in some way, they have to be integrated in our society. So one of the highlights of our presidency is, in fact, the EU Social Summit in Oporto. Then our priorities are in line with the presidency trio priorities. So the rotating priority of the Council of the European Union is nowadays done in trios, so 3 countries together. That was Germany, Portugal, and the next will be Slovenia. And here in San Francisco, Portugal will have the local chair for the whole of 2021, because there is no, Slovenia is not represented here. So the trio of priorities, in fact, they come from the European Union strategic agenda, which was agreed in 2019, and which we are going to implement until 2024. So the first item is to protect citizens and freedoms, and Uli mentioned this, so in it lies also the rule of law. The second, to develop a strong and vibrant economic base, and obviously we will do this in a green and digital way, and then building a climate neutral, green, fair and social Europe, which this is what we focused in our presidency. And then fourth, it's to promote the interests of Europe and values on the global stage, and also stress the strategic autonomy of Europe, which is open to the world. So we saw there are several crises. One of them was this health crisis. Well, when all of a sudden COVID hit, and we were not even in the health system prepared, because our health system is managed nationally. It's not a European level. So, you know, countries, they realized they didn't even have paracetamol, which is something you don't use in the United States, but in Europe we use paracetamol a lot instead of this the Brufen, and instead of aspirin. So even this, we ran out of these things. So this is a strategic autonomy that are basic things that we have to do, not going on into the military here. That's not we don't have to discuss that, but we also, in this respect, we also stress that Europe is open to the world, which is very, very important at the moment, because the world has become multipolar, and sometimes poles don't agree with each other, and this is something we are trying to combat, because in Europe we are absolutely, completely by nature and by attitude multilateral. So we will try to strengthen Europe's resilience, economic as well, also the citizens' trust in the European social model, and then, you know, by promoting values of solidarity, trying to also promote the convergence and cohesion of all the countries in the European Union, because, as you know, there are richer and poorer countries in the European Union. And we'll try to coordinate this crisis and to see if we can recover together from the crisis. I think that we are on the right path, and Uli also mentioned that. I mean, we have decided to support some initiatives that even Germany was against, even this of borrowing in international markets, which the European Union has never done. And now for the crisis, although it might have seemed that our response was chaotic in Europe, I mean, it wasn't. I mean, this is a new world. The COVID will stay forever. Nobody was, I don't know why nobody was expecting it, but nobody was actually expecting something like this. We were all taken by surprise. So at the beginning, we were trying to react. There was no time to plan. So I'm very positive about this European project, and that's okay. Okay, I'm Portuguese, and we are known for being very, very pro-European. But even as I told you, I'm an optimist. And even in this crisis, I think we have learned so many lessons for Europe and for the world, but for Europe as well. And so we'll come out of it stronger and more united, I want to believe.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Maria-João, for stressing European creativity, but also for highlighting the challenges and the ambitious priorities that we now have in the next months during the Portuguese presidency. I will turn to my colleague Duarte, who has a follow-up question. I don't see the German consul. I'm not sure if Uli has a technical problem with the internet, perhaps. But I suggest we move forward.
Well, I shut myself my video off as I
very good.
So
to hear that you're still here, Uli.
because I wanted to hear Maria-João, but I'm here.
Very good, wonderful. Duarte, floor is yours. Go ahead, Duarte.
So I'll move to the next question, and remind you as well that the chat is open. If you guys, if someone in the audience wants to put some questions, please feel free to put it on the chat, and Jeroen and I later will ask those questions. My next question, it's related to the priorities that the Consul General of Portugal and the Consul General of Germany talked about. I will start with Maria-João, the Consul of Portugal. Related to these priorities, which initiatives related to the European Union will the Consul General of Portugal in San Francisco take in the context of the presidency? That's the question from Maria-João. And in the case of the Consul General of Germany, what were the initiatives that took place in the context of the German presidency? But let's start with Maria-João to talk about these events.
We try to, well, it's been a little bit difficult now because everything is virtual, and then we work as a team of European Consuls Generals here in San Francisco. We try to meet with the authorities, we meet with the Deputy Lieutenant Governor, we try to arrange also webinars or meetings in the digital sector. Yesterday, for instance, it was the International Day, International Remembrance Day of the Holocaust victims, and we did go to the Holocaust Memorial to all the European Union Consuls General together to pay tribute to the victims. And we also had representatives from AGC, from the Anti-Defamation League, from the San Francisco Interfaith Council, and we also had a rabbi of one of the synagogues here, congregations here in San Francisco. This is something that our colleagues, the Italian colleagues, started a couple of years ago, which the German colleague Uli continued. And so it's something that we used to do physically, and now we had to do in separate. During the presidency, we'll try to organize some webinars also with you. I would like to thank you for being available for this. And I'm also trying to join our efforts to those of the Consuls General in Los Angeles, because there are 13 of us here in San Francisco and perhaps 15 in Los Angeles. So some of we'll try to have some joint initiatives as well. Of course, we'll have something for Europe's Day. Maybe we'll have something for the women. Europe's Day is, or Schumann's Day is on May 9th. We might try to do something for Women's Day on March the 8th. And we have other plans, but they haven't been confirmed, so I cannot really go into details because we're still, it's more difficult. It's, you know, people are a bit tired of all these webinars and Zooms and things, so we have to be creative and to organize something that will be interesting for all, and at the same time have the maximum outreach.
Thank you very much. And now Hans as well, what other initiatives did Germany presidency take in the context of the German presidency?
What other initiatives? Sorry, I didn't get the last bit of the discussion because indeed I was gone. So is there any particular question?
It's the same question. It's basically which initiatives related to the European Union did the Consul General of Germany take in the context of the presidency?
What did we do? Okay, yes. We had, it started off with a very wonderful time when we still had visitors. So we had, we did what we could to have an intensive debate amongst the Consuls General here in San Francisco. So we had lunches with various important people. There was the Lieutenant Governor Eleni Koulalakis. There was the EU ambassador to DC, Stavros Lambrinidis, and I think that the common message we sent to him was that given all the various developments in tech and digitization and the discussions on the governance of these new technologies and new possibilities, it would be a very wise idea for the EU to come to the west coast of the US and establish some sort of a more permanent presence here that we appealed for very strongly, I think, and I'm optimistic that at some point something might come out of it. But then, of course, we started the whole Zoom and COVID-related not in person meetings. And we focused to a great degree on the upcoming elections. We had various events, like a couple of consuls, or all the consuls generals here contributed to a collection of small videos on Schumann Day and other things like that. So we tried to do what was possible within the Zoom context, and we tried to do to get as many important or influential people to speak about the elections and the hopes we would have for after the elections in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Uli. And also, I'm very glad that the first event that you mentioned was organized actually in cooperation with our institute. So that's always wonderful for us when we are able to reach out and work together with the consulates. But let me go back to a topic that you mentioned earlier in the discussion. It's also something that I see showing up in the questions from the audience. So perhaps this is also for me a good moment to remind people in the audience, if you have a question for our guests, please write it in the chat function and Duarte will gladly then pass it on to our speakers. But coming back to, let's come back to the topic of Brexit, right? We know that there's good news that there was this last minute free trade deal finally that was reached at least, but many questions and many concerns remain regarding Brexit. The United Kingdom, of course, is very important to the European economy as a whole. Germany, I think, also in particular. Vice versa, we know that Germany is the UK's second largest export market, but I'm thinking also of Portugal. Some of you may not know that, but there's actually a very old alliance between the United Kingdom and Portugal, dating back all the way to the Middle Ages. The history of the port wine is a very good example of this, and is, of course, in the case of Portugal, tourism. Very important to the Portuguese economy, with a large number of English tourists coming to places such as the Algarve or the island of Madeira. So let me turn perhaps to Maria-João this time first, and then to Uli to comment a little bit on how you perceive the long-term consequences of Brexit for your countries and for Europe as a whole. Maria-João.
As you mentioned, Britain is our oldest alliance, and we are their oldest alliance as well. And we have connections to the United Kingdom. We are also the most Western states in Europe, and so we are very strong. For us, the transatlantic relation is very important. So we have several things in common. It's true, many British citizens go to the Algarve, to the south of Portugal on holidays, and they buy property there. They live here. They live there. So we are happy with the agreement, of course, like all other partners. We hope to some of the issues and sectors are still outside of the agreement. So we'll see what happens here. And as every country in the world, we'll try to make the most of it and try to avoid problems. Of course, we'll try to take advantage of this special relations we have with the United Kingdom, but obviously always within European Union legislation. So I think this is also something that it's like it's unraveling, and we will know perhaps in 6 months' time. We'll understand better what actually our relationship will be, bilateral and also between the European Union and the United Kingdom. I personally, and that will always be my view, I'm very sad to have seen the United Kingdom go. And well, but that was their choice, and now we have to make the best of it.
Yeah, very good, Maria-João. Let me turn to Uli. Same question.
Yeah. Same question. Thank you. I can fully subscribe to what Maria-João said. As I mentioned before, I think it's a good basis for a new partnership. but it's a minus compared to what we had before.
Mm-hmm.
And it will never get better than what was before. And personally, if I may say that on the side, you know, given different political circumstances, I'm not so sure whether the decision in the UK would be the same today. You know, if there'd been another American president and not so much of the Murdoch propelled press. But we'll see. It is what it is, and we have to deal with it. So considering that, I think it's good that we have a deal. It's much better than no deal. And of course, it's very important for the German economy, for the British economy, and many other economies. But I'm also, I mean, this is a discussion at university, so I would also like to say a few critical things, as we like open discussions. It's more than I would have expected to have solved, but it's also less than would have been good. Mm-hmm. I think there are various aspects which have not been dealt with properly. For example, the financial services part of it. And also, I'm afraid, I hope, you know, politics will prove me wrong, but in many of the questions where one couldn't find an agreement, one has agreed on sort of either postponing it or starting a continual process of discussion and review and coming back to the issues. So I'm also afraid that it might be a source of quarreling again and again about certain aspects which have not been covered by the agreement yet. And you know, even in some cases, it might lead to, you know, some which I personally think are rather petty quarrels over the status of the EU ambassador. I think that is ridiculous, and it's something which has the potential, at least, to to make people in the various EU countries and in the UK on the other side, you know, if quarrels on that level would continue, it would have the potential to make people fed up with the other side, which is the opposite of what we want. Yeah. So we would like to have the best relation ever with the UK, and therefore, of course, we are also, and I'm sure Portugal and other member states do the same, looking at programs which might make up for the minuses. For example, no participation in Erasmus+. So that probably is a field where national agreements between the UK and individual member states might try to make up for the loss of participation in Erasmus+. But you know, I think the glass is more than half full, but there's also a lot to be asked for still coming.
Erasmus Plus being, of course, the exchange between students from different EU member states.
Yeah.
That unfortunately British universities. I'm turning to you for the follow-up question.
Yes, so the next question is also related to relationships among European Union members. Let's start with perhaps Maria-João. It's a complex discussion on European Union's 2021-27 budget and the European Union Recovery Plan. The veto by Hungary and Poland, supported by Slovenia. How did or does, in your opinion, Slovenia's support to the veto by Hungary and Poland affect the cooperation between the three members composing the trio?
Well, as I mentioned, our presidency's program is part of the framework provided by the presidency trio program, yes, the three countries together. And we have been working with both partners. We have been working with the Germans and we have been working with the Slovenians in a true spirit of trio. Even Uli and I are an example, because even after his presidency ended, his local chair here in San Francisco ended, we still meet for coffee. And so I go and I drink his words, we drink coffee together, and then I listen to what he has to say. And whenever I have a question, I ask him. So we're still in a spirit of a partnership, even if the German local chair has finished here on the German presidency as well. So this spirit of trio and partnership was not shaken by the negotiations of the multi-financial framework and the recovery plan. All the more so because the negotiation in the end had a very positive outcome at the December European Council. So we'll continue to count on the collaboration of both our partners. That is Germany and Slovenia. We are not concerned and it will not affect our work during our presidency.
Then same question. Thank you, Maria-João. Same question for Lee.
Well, yeah.
If it is as optimistic, I think we all are, right, about this Slovenian support.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I agree to what Maria-João said. I do. When you look at the history of the EU, there have always been situations which were very difficult, and the one, of course, with the question of, you know, the positions of Poland and Hungary, that's a very basic question and a very important question and a very difficult question to tackle. And as I said before, I think we have started to find the beginning of an answer in that conditionality mechanism, which was agreed upon and agreed to also by Poland and Hungary and Slovenia. But, you know, there's also the general power of the EU administration, and I'm not talking about the deep state or anything, but there is an EU Commission working for the good of all European citizens, and there are a million committees and ways of cooperation in which important and responsible people are working in the interest of the EU as a whole and of the EU citizens. And therefore, despite these difficulties, I don't see a major hiccup or anything. It's, you know, it's the regular way of dealing. We are 27 states with governments and political positions and domestic policies. And, you know, 70 years ago or 100 years ago, we were killing each other. And now we're talking with very strong words, but with eventually finding a result and a compromise. I think that's fabulous. So I'm very optimistic. I don't see any major hurdles for the cooperation, certainly not between the countries of the trio presidency. But beyond that, also, I think Brexit has shown, and in the long run, might even have a positive influence on the general political discussions in the EU member states. Positive in that case, meaning in my view, positive, supporting the idea of the European Union and reconfirming and the pro position of the people in the member states.
Yeah. Let me perhaps follow up with a question that relates to something that Maria-João brought up earlier, the danger of populism, right? And the danger of the corona crisis somehow affecting public support for the European Union. I've seen studies that revealed that, especially at the beginning of the crisis, there was quite some disappointment about the EU. I saw that 47% of respondents in an investigation felt that the EU had been irrelevant at the beginning of the coronavirus crisis, because it was handled, at a national level, not at an EU level, the response to it. It changed, of course, once the EU took the lead, especially when it comes to the vaccine, and the whole new priority now is vaccination. And here clearly we see the EU administration taking the lead. But now, in the past days, we've heard news coming from Europe that there's problems, right? There's problems with the deliveries of the vaccines. And at the same time, we see actually that the one European country where vaccination is going much faster happens to be the United Kingdom, right? At the current moment, I think 10% already of the population in the UK has been vaccinated, whereas within the EU, I think it's still at 1 or perhaps 2% of the population. So that's potentially a danger, a challenge definitely for the EU. So perhaps Maria-João could briefly comment on that, and then Uli as well, at the response, so to speak, from the EU to the corona crisis and the danger of kind of, that this would affect public support and to the EU. Maria-João.
Thank you, Jerome. Well, I was yesterday saying to my staff, because we have a small young staff and we discuss all issues, that I wouldn't, I think this is the worst moment to be head of state, prime minister, or whatever. The management, coronavirus management, will never be completely successful. You see, even here, the problems that the governor is having at the moment and how he's being criticized. And same here in the United States, what has been done. So there seems not to be a perfect model. And whatever the governments do, they'll always be criticized. That's until now we saw that the vaccination is going very well in the United Kingdom, but they chose to, well, they are one country, so they can decide faster. You have an even better example in Israel, who's now being used as example, and they're testing that actually specialists are and researchers are seeing what the reactions are, because they have vaccinated so many people that now they can see how much the vaccine affected after a week, after 2 weeks. And so in Europe, it was slower also because we have to approve, so the procedure to approve the vaccines took longer. So that's why the vaccination has not started as early. I don't think that there's, I'm very tolerant, and I dare not criticize any government because I'm quite sure they're all trying their best. There is no actual roadmap that has been experienced before and that gave good results. So we're all trying to do the best, and eventually I want to believe that in the end, when these vaccinations get rolled out quicker, then we'll see what was the best and what was the best solution, because to also too fast approve vaccines which are completely new. This is a completely new vaccine. Yes, it has never been tested before. I taught genetics, so I'm apprehensive about going fast with a new type of vaccine that was never tried before. So I'm not so critical about the fact that Europe is being very careful and approving all the vaccines.
Yeah, thank you, Maria-João. Let's turn to Uli.
Well, I can completely subscribe. And in addition, maybe if I add that, the people who live in Europe, they have various frames of reference. They live in a city. The city in Germany, for example, it's part of a federal state. It's part of the national state, and it's part of Europe. And if you see the debates between the chancellor on the German federal level and the various federal states, I mean, when they meet about Corona, they have 12-hour meetings. And it's not because they agree on everything, but because they disagree. And at some point they have to find something, meaning that these are very, very difficult decisions with various stakeholders in various positions. So if the EU cannot respond fast, it's not only the result of what the EU does, but it's the policies of the member states as well. And of course, the EU, I think, has again shown in the beginning, we were surprised we didn't react immediately as an EU in the right way. But after having understood that, the turn came pretty fast. And, imagine, just to illustrate what Maria-João said, if there had been a few cases which now, where the vaccination now had huge negative results, or maybe 2 or 3 people dying from it, people would say, oh, wonderful, the EU was more careful than the UK. The UK said speed, and the EU institution said, let's be a little bit more diligent in what we do. I mean, these are decisions that can either be wrong or right. So.
Thank you. Dwight?
Yes. My next question is, first perhaps for Maria-João, has to do with the priorities, back to the priorities and expectations. So we do know that the presidency of the European Union is in rotation, 6 months. And we all know that one of the goals is establishment of relationships, but each country has a different approach, I would say, to the presidency. And what are the expectations for Maria-João of the Portuguese presidency in 6 months? When it's over in 6 months, what you expect to accomplish? And for Uli, what was the input of the German presidency that just finished? You're mute, Maria-João.
Well, number one, managing this COVID-19 pandemic, yes, that would be the biggest success. Of course, it's not up to the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union to do it, but that's one of our priorities in our in the meetings in which we participate as far as we can. That will be priority number one, and the economic recovery. And so they come hand in hand also, and we still see a lot of hiccups, yes, countries opening and then closing and opening and closing, because we cannot predict, I'm sorry, we cannot predict how it will be in 3 weeks' time. It's impossible. And so that's priority number one. And then there are, I didn't mention, but I think that I should mention this, in the global arena, let's say, in the international relations, during our presidency, we will also seek to give new political impetus to these transatlantic relationships. Yes, there was a change here. You have a new president. The United States, in fact, are a strategic partner in all domains for us, for the European Union. So we want that under our presidency, that the dialogue with the United States will be strengthening, and to see if we can realize the full potential of our transatlantic relations. So that's one of our priorities as well. As I mentioned, we have, apart from the 3 priorities that I mentioned, I think I did, so it's a green Europe, a digital Europe, a global Europe, a resilient Europe as well, so, and a social Europe. In the global Europe, we also even hope, I don't know if it will take place, to have a summit between the European Union and the United States. That will be very interesting. So it's on our agenda, as well as European Union India summit as well. You know, we also understand the importance of the Pacific in Europe, and we also hope to have a summit between the European Union and the African Union, which had to be postponed because of the pandemic. That we also hope to do something else, which has to do with digital and connections. So we will inaugurate, we think, we hope, in June, something which is called the Ella Link, which is a large submarine cable with the optical cable, which will connect Southern America with the European continent. So we'll see how much we can go ahead in this digital and green transition, but also, as Uli mentioned, it's not only up to the presidency. There are several instances. You have the Commission, you have the other member countries. And so this is another question that I will only be able to answer in 6 months' time, a little bit with the COVID. Maybe we can have, since I have I will be the local chair after the end of our presidency, maybe then we can do a sum up and see what we achieved and what are the hopes for the next 6 months.
It would be very interesting, Maria-João. Thank you. And let's listen to Uli now, what he has to say.
Well, you see, we're completely in sync, Maria-João and me. Maybe the one point which I would have stressed now is the new chance for a transatlantic cooperation between the EU and the US. Because if you call it the project, the sort of Western style democracy, that project was in a serious crisis in the last couple of years. And now with a new administration, and that's important, we can and the US, maybe that sentence, of course, I forgot, but it's self-explanatory. The US is the leading nation in that project, like lobbying for, or you know, whatever, working for the development, the positive development of Western style democracy in the world. The leading nation for that is the US. And I'm also very, very optimistic that the one great power which the US history has shown that the US has is the ability to cleanse itself and to come out better, even if there were phases where things went wrong. So that project will be revived, and that is something where also the German government will try to contribute as much as possible to. We have a new transatlantic agenda, and the essential basis of that, and I can't underline the importance of that more seriously. I think the world can again believe that the US and the other countries which also believe in multilateral approach to problem solving, worldwide problems. The world can believe again that the US is striving for the ethical and moral high ground. The US can be again, you know, among the nations who say it's like facts and honesty and not lies which are important. And the countries which are promoting respectful cooperation with each other, not moving goalposts of public discourse into garbage level or anything like that. So I think it can't be overestimated how important it is that that the new administration here, personified in the president, really can lobby for this project of Western democracy strong enough. And in that context, there will be a real surge of transatlantic cooperation, I'm very sure.
Yeah, thank you so much, Uli. And thank you also for stressing the importance of transatlantic relations, which is also something that is at the heart of our institute when we work with these wonderful young people we have on the Berkeley campus, and we try to connect them also to the European Union as a place of hope and a place of opportunities also for young Americans. I look at the clock and I see that we have come to the end of our conversation. Let me then thank you all in the audience for joining us today and for learning with us on the EU presidency, what was achieved under the German presidency and what are the priorities for the Portuguese presidency. I also would like to thank my colleagues Heike, Akasemi, and Duarte for joining me at today's conversation. And of course, a big thank you to our speakers, Maria-João and Uli, for taking the time to joining us today, for your very insightful thoughts that you shared with us. And I'm very much looking forward to continuing our conversation, as Maria-João already indicated. Perhaps at the end of the Portuguese presidency, we can have a follow-up conversation. But thank you all so much. It was wonderful to be with you. And thank you for the people in the audience. And again, a big thank you to the two speakers, Maria-João and Uli. Thank you so much. And
thank you. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you, Maria-João.